I've been thinking recently about moments of transformation. A relative the other day, Manya, her name is, asked me, what are the elements or events or moments where you felt this food journey was different than all the ones you've tried before? She was quite interested to see not, what's necessarily on my plate or what recipes am I using now after reaching one of my first goals. She was interested in what were the key pivots in this food journey that made it so that going back to the way I was, where I was 125 kilograms and now about 86, a little under 86. What was interesting or unique about this time that made it so that, going back was more difficult, let's say, or near impossible. And so that I've been consistent on this lifestyle for a few months, under a year at this point. And her question really was a good one, I think, partly because I don't see that many people talking about moments of transformation in such a sense. What were the key pivots in such a journey, both mentally and physically? And partly also because, on a personal note, the last couple of weeks I've been speaking with my coach about a return of some of these old rhythms, at least in my head and partially in my eating. Old rhythms of, and we'll talk about this, responding to emotions with food. In slight ways, it's actually funny how slight they are coming back, but also in ways that we can start to see the rhythms that we worked so hard to eliminate, to wean down off of, that it gave us pause, and it made us start to want to reflect about, why might I be craving again in a way that my body's saying, oh, this emotion needs food to heal it. But before I get to what that means exactly, I'd like to give what might be handy for some of the people listening to this, some context to where I was before I started this particular journey, because I think it's important, not just for knowledge sake, but also as a primer for transformation itself. In short, I was at a point of trial and error fatigue. 10 or 11 years in my adult life, trying different diets and things and regimens and picking up pieces of advice and succeeding and failing and succeeding a bit and failing and succeeding and failing, and reaching a kind of low point in where I was 125 kilograms, and I started to consider more serious and severe options like surgeries, like injections, things with like a significant monetary impact on my life, things with potential risk, things with potential to go back to the way I was after performing that thing that has a high cost and high risk. And we've heard this before. Someone gets a sleeve surgery or gastric bypass, and a year later they're back to where they were, and maybe more. So just this sense of, I don't know what to do, basically, and I'm tired. And I think it really primed me to be willing to take on the core work that came to be part of this journey, which was ego work, which was basically the ability to put my own ego at the door, my own story about what's food's role in my life outside actually of my day, and bring in a new story. In short, that is perhaps a solid way to capture the actual on the ground meta story, we would call it, the meta story of transformation. There's a story that we operate by as to, hey, this is me, this character, this is the daily stresses I have in life, this is how I cope with the daily stresses. One of the things I do is eat. That story was a part of me, a big part of me, and it's why I was eating the way I was. And the whole process was about changing that story. But if you want to get into more specifics, I'd like to offer a bit more into what does that mean? What does that look like? So around this time of reaching like the low point of trial and error fatigue, Coach appears randomly through marketing or social media or something like that. I see that there is this flexibility to the program that she offers. So I was like, all right, cool. It seems that I can do the thing that I want to do in a gradual sense. Let's talk to this person. What I found was a powerful way to look at me in relation to food. And that's what the first 2 months of practice was all about. The first 2 months was about the why and the me now and the me in the future. It was about finding that I was operating under we all have a reason why we do something, whether we know it or not. A large part of me was trying to lose weight, to become a certain shape, to attract certain people, to then be happy. I've said this before on my podcast. And that wasn't sustainable, because the minute I became uninterested in somebody, or just the uninterested in the process of having like a relationship, let's say, my food suffered immediately. So it just wasn't sustainable. It was a poor why. First, it was identifying this, why do I want to lose weight? An ultimate why. And not just identifying it, but also weaving it in to the everyday. Now that sounds kind of abstract, I think. And it wasn't. It wasn't as abstract as you might think. It was quite cool, actually. So when I identified that, hey, I'm pretty much using food as like a drug in the medicinal sense, to heal stress, emotions, sadness, fear, anger, and also like a drug in where it became a habit. So maybe sometimes people might eat a burger to feel good, but for the most part, they don't really do that. For the most part, they have other ways to manage stress, emotions. For me, it was the other way around. For the most part, I dealt with emotions and stress and all these things, food, and maybe sometimes I'd handle it on my own. So that's where my why sort of started to gravitate towards this idea of like, I don't want to be someone who's addicted to food in that sense, using it as a drug to deal with my shit, basically. I just saw myself as a weak character in that story with food, and I wanted to become a stronger character. And it was enough to carry me through the whole process. Now, the day-to-day, how to weave it in to the everyday, it was like identification, really, believe it or not, seeing yourself, seeing your patterns in itself heals. Having perspective on who you are, but from sort of a non-judgmental state, heals. I think that's really important, and I don't know where it's expressed, but I feel like it might be underexpressed. So coming to this why in my everyday was about identifying what are the enemies to this why. What are the things that I'm doing that's hindering me as the character of the guy who's drugged by food? What am I doing that's preventing me to getting to the character that is managing his anger, stress, sadness, loneliness, boredom without food? Food, whose primary goal is nutrition, right? Of course, we enjoy food, but if you're not eating it for nutrition and only for pleasure, then that has a question mark, I guess, around it. So it was really about raising question marks about every single time that I was not eating for nutrition. And that's what I did. I started a food journal, and the focus of that food journal became, is this a craving or not? That's it. Is this a craving or not? And when it's a craving, it is about bringing in that new why. Now, definitely it's easier said than done. The why isn't enough to sustain you through a very strong craving. Maybe some people who are watching this, listening to this, can resonate with that. But the key thing another key thing from this transformation, in addition to the why, was gradual change. Was every week, I don't have to do this monumental step forward. There's no expectation, there's no burden on me to do that. Maybe I'm the same as last week. Even that is change relative to who I was when I started the journey. So maybe all I could do that week was track how many cravings I had. And I failed to replace the craving with something else every single time. That's fine. As long as I was tracking them, as long as I was identifying the trigger of these cravings, then the week after I could select as little as one craving that comes up that is under this frame of, oh, this was for work stress, or oh, this was for social anxiety or something like that. I take one of these craving instances and just break it down and see where I can make a small change. Sometimes it might be replacing the food item with something slightly healthier. That might be a gradual step forward. Another time it might be meditating. Sometimes that doesn't work for anybody. Another time it might be picking up the phone and calling someone. This was something that was kind of new in my personal life. I don't love to talk about stuff that bother me with people, especially in the moment. But I noticed that, hey, it actually helps. It heals like the food heals, but with less calories. So sometimes I would text a friend or call some family and just see how they're doing and touch base. Even touching base heals, not necessarily that you have to open your heart up. So it really was about gradually weaving in the why, the new why in my day to day. And it was a fight with myself. It was a fight with this feeling of, I believe I need this craving. I believe I need this food to survive, to persist. And it was a fight with every day and every meal almost with those ideas. But if you have this why that you're convinced with, then slowly over time, those ideas start to feel, the old ones, the ones that have that harmful factor, like overeating, like eating outside of nutrition and being convinced it's good and justified. Slowly, those ideas start to become less credible, less believable, less powerful. And one by one, you remove the cravings from the days of your week. And week by week, my cravings and overeating started to go down until we eliminated it to zero completely for months without fail. There were other elements that went into this. I mentioned few things like beliefs. I mentioned something else like the me at the end of this story. Maybe I'll cover it in another podcast episode. I don't want to crowd this one with too many ideas. But the thing that kind of was the boat that I guess floated me through it was the why. And the others were kind of assisting tools. You know, the me that is at the end of the journey is like the destination that I'm heading towards. So it helps with the direction. The beliefs that I'm fighting with, it's giving more shape and form to the enemies to the why. But again, we can talk about that in another podcast episode.